everyone. Hi.
You guys are, this is less exciting.
I know you guys just witnessed, I don't know if you can see all the glitter on the ground.
So much glitter up here.
Way more animated, but I am so happy to be sitting here with Skottie Young.
Oh, thank you.
If you aren't familiar with his work, he has worked on practically every Marvel character in some capacity, and is a creator on I Hate Fairyland and the Oz series and the new series. We're getting into all of that.
Awesome.
So thank you for being up here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yes. So I just first want to know, how did you get into comics, into drawing, into writing? How did that all begin?
I've always drawn ever since I was a kid. I think we all start drawing as a kid, and then some of us just never stop. So I was drawing from a very early age. And when I started to kind of apply it to sequential storytelling was when I discovered Mad Magazine.
Nice.
I lived in a very small town in Illinois. We had no comic shops. We had a grocery store, and they had a magazine rack, and they had Mad Magazine on there.
Right.
And
awesome.
I don't know what people can see, but like it's a there we go.
Awesome.
So Mad Magazine was a really big part of teaching me humor and cartooning and what sequential storytelling was, and I fell in love with that. And I was a paper boy as well, so I started falling in love with the comics. So Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts and The Far Side and all those things really latched onto me as well. So that's kind of where I started my love of drawing.
Okay, awesome.
And things like that. So.
Okay. So your art style obviously is very unique, or it's very recognizable. It's distinct. So you were influenced by Mad Magazine. Were there other visual influences that kind of formed how you drew your art?
As I got older, I grew up. I'm old, so I grew up. I grew up kind of in the absolute glory days of hip hop music in the 80s and 86 and 88, which was really amazing hip hop years, and I really fell in love with hip hop culture and graffiti culture and things like that. So a lot of that flavor kind of started to seep into my inspiration.
Kind of carried over.
Yeah, like a lot of character work, a lot of color, a lot of big. So that was a lot of stuff that was happened early on, and so even when I got into comics, I started to try to merge those two worlds. And I became a skater. I skateboarded a lot, and so there's a lot of that graphics that were in skateboarding as well.
Yes.
But then mostly it was, and then outside of that, it would just be. I grew up in the prime era of Disney afternoon animation, right?
Right.
So like Chip and Dale and Rescue Rangers and Darkwing Duck and things like that. So I just was really had a big passion for animation.
Yes.
So that's where a lot of the cartoony style of mine comes from.
Right, you can totally see that in your work. So tell us a little bit about how you got into Marvel, and then kind of how the Young variants came about.
Oh, wow.
How that relationship began.
So I'll take a really long story and I'll really boil it down. I was in the right place at the right time when a friend of mine was in New York. This is back in the early 2000s, like 2001. A friend of mine was in New York. And by this friend of mine, I mean C.B. Cebulski, who is now the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics.
Yes.
But at the time, he was just my friend. And he happened to be drinking with some editors one night, and they needed a fill-in artist for an issue of Iceman. And they're like, hey, do you know any artists that could jump on this really quick? And he was like, yeah, my friend Skottie, blah, blah, blah. And so an editor called me the next day from Marvel, was like, hey, do you think you could, do this issue? Little did he know I had never drawn a full comic in my life. But I was super like, yep, I can do that.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm in. That's
a
hard in.
Fine. Yeah.
So yeah, I faked it. I faked it till I maked it, right? For a lot of years. And then after that, so a lot of things happen, and then the Young variants, right?
And then the Young variants.
It is the craziest, because everybody a lot of people know me for that now. But it's still, in my mind, my side hustle.
Right.
Right?
I would figure you have such a long bibliography of things.
It's this weird side job of mine that everybody thinks is my main job.
And yet they're like, oh, baby variant, Skottie Young. So
I literally got a call one day from George over at Marvel, and he was like, hey, Midtown, it was during the Avengers vs. X-Men big event. And they were like, Midtown Comics wants to do an exclusive for just their store. And they were asking for you. And I said, hey, I've seen him draw like the X babies every now and then. You should maybe see if he'll draw it like that. And I was like, all right. Like, I mean, it wasn't my thing. I just thought, okay,
cool. But you're like, sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
I drew that cover. I think there was like 35 characters on it. It was a wraparound cover. Midtown sold a trillion copies. It was like, they just sold tons of them. And so Marvel came back and was like, whoa, hey, do you want to do 5 more? Like, and I was like, whoa, 5, cool. Yeah, I'll definitely do 5.
Right.
And then I did 3, and they were like, before I even done with the 5, they were like, you want to do 10? Wait, do you want to do 20? And all of a sudden, like now,
it's snowballing to like 100.
Right. And yeah, and now I've done over 300. And my calendar year, if I were to show you my eye calendar, it is every single week from now until almost 2020 has scheduled baby covers on it. So that's 6 years later. I thought this thing would last about 3 months, and everybody like, yeah, that's cool. And 6 years later, 300 covers later, I'm still doing it. I have a blast. Everybody seems to be enjoying it. So yeah, it's a weird ride.
No, like I told you before we came on here, like our wallet hurts because we try to collect so many of the variants. But before we get into your other things, the baby variants, where did that idea come from to make these characters into kids, essentially?
Like I said, I mean, there was a real big tradition in Marvel that I want to say Arthur Adams. Help me out there for everybody. I think Arthur Adams did the first X-Baby series when he was doing a run on X-Men. And which was like a weird Mojo world, am I right? Mojo world. So Mojo had like messed with the X-Men and turned them into the X-Babies or whatever. And so there was always been a tradition of that, and they just asked me to do the same thing. But the thing that I think that I turned, where at first I just leaned into directly that.
Right.
And then eventually I started to think about them way more. Again, I went back to my roots of Calvin and Hobbes and Mad Magazine, and I started thinking of them much more as a one-panel comic strip. They were less about just drawing a cool drawing and more about what was the gag, like what's the joke to be had, right? And the best thing to make fun of is what we love the most, right? So I love comic books and I love Marvel Comics, so there's so much stuff to kind of have fun with. And I think that's really what won it over and has me keep doing it, because I don't feel like I'm just trying to draw a cool drawing. I'm trying to come up with a good, funny joke, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that's really kind of what leaned me into it. It really isn't to me, it's not about the visual style, which I know that's what most, that might be
what grabs people into.
To me, it's like the actual drawing isn't the thing that I care about the most. It's is there a funny joke to be had? Is there something that's going to make everybody laugh?
It's the context of it.
Yeah, like if you've been a fan of Cable forever, I want you to laugh at a Cable joke,
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, there's a couple favorites. So, are you guys familiar with the Avengers cover where they're all playing the video game? It looks like that, right? It looks like they're playing. It's like Galaga.
Yes,
right?
I own that.
Right.
Yes.
So that came from. How many people saw the first Avengers movie? Everybody, right?
Right.
So the thing was, they make a joke in the movie where he's walking through the helicarrier. Tony Stark's walking through the helicarrier, and he says like, "Oh, look at that guy over there. He's playing Galaga on his computer, right?" Well, think about the end of that movie. What is the end of the movie? It's literally giant, like, centipedes flying through the sky, and the Avengers down at the bottom, like, shooting them. So literally the end of the actual Avengers movie is Galaga the video game. Now you're going to go back and watch it. It's going to blow your mind.
Like, oh, man.
So that's one of my favorite covers, because I was like, there's that one, and then there's a second one that I feel like I really got away with. And did you guys read Civil War II? Brian's Civil War II?
Yeah.
So I go up to the Marvel Writers Retreat. We plan out stuff a year, 2 years in advance. So I knew everything that was going to happen in that series before it happened. So I did a cover for one of the first issues, and in it, spoiler, it's a couple years ago now, but Hawkeye shoots the Hulk in the head with an arrow and kills him. Yeah. Right? Well, on the first cover, long before this ever happens, they're all looking at the guy who can tell the future, and Hulk has a suction cup arrow on his head. So I spoiled the ending of Civil War months and months before, but nobody knew to look for it. But right there on the cover, I told you what was going to happen, and nobody picked up on it. So I was pretty proud of that one.
So you have also worked on the Oz series, which is acclaimed. I love it. So, of course, Wizard of Oz is a classic. When you jumped into that series, was there inspiration from the books and the film going into that, or how did that come about that you became a part of that project, and what did you want to bring to that story?
The interesting thing about the Oz books, It's twofold. I never thought when I was drawing comics that I would work at Marvel Comics. I grew up reading Image comics mostly because Image had started around when I was that age, when I was in high school. So I thought to be in comics, you had to make up your own comic. I didn't know to go to Charles Spider-Man because I thought somebody already had that job. Like,
right.
That's how my kid brain worked, right?
Right, yeah.
So I always thought that I was going to make up my own comics, and then somehow I end up at Marvel, and I'm working at Marvel for years, and it was always weird. And I did an X-Men run, and then I got a call from Marvel, and they were like, "Hey, we're thinking about adapting the Wizard of Oz novels. We want you to draw them." And I was like, two things. A, that's kind of my favorite stuff, like Never-Ending Story and The Labyrinth, The Dark Crystal. These are my favorite movies. So while I've worked on superhero comics my whole career, it's not really where my heart is, but that's what paid my rent, right?
Right.
But if you were to give me the choice, I'd draw Alice in Wonderland in a heartbeat. But at the same time, I'm trying to be a businessman, and I was like, I don't know. I feel like I'm drawing the X-Men right now, and you kind of want me to go do the Wizard of Oz. Like, this is a bad business call for me, right? And I actually turned them down for about 2 weeks. They would keep calling me, and I'd say no. And
What
they'd call me again.
persuaded you then?
They would say, it could be a whatever schedule you want. You can draw however you want. You could be however many issues you want. So they just kept making it sweeter and sweeter. And finally, I was like, okay, look, it's not going to sell. It's going to be a failure. I'll do it for a year. You got to give me covers on a regular. So I ended up doing covers on Deadpool and Cable for a year. Because I thought, as long as I'm on shelves in comic book shops, while I do this book that's definitely going to fail, I'll at least be able to come back and people won't have forgotten who I am. I was so wrong. It ends up outselling almost everything.
But it's good that you were wrong.
I loved it. Well, the thing is because I thought it was going to be a failure, I leaned into it so hard. Like, I was just like, I'm going to do whatever I want because nobody's going to see this. And that ended up working to our advantage. The book was an amazing sales success. I won 4 Eisner Awards from that comic book. And it ended up changing my entire career. Not just my career, it changed my entire life. Ever since I worked on that book for 5 years, I did almost 50 issues of Oz, and it changed my life from there on. So I was completely wrong, and I've never been more. I'm married, so you don't ever say these words. I was never so happy to be wrong.
So thinking about Oz and then your other book, I Hate Fairyland, which I love.
Thank you.
Gertrude is like a dark spirit animal for me. I love it. So since you worked on Oz and how I Hate Fairyland is, did that bleed over? Did you think about Oz and kind of just the kind of fantastical world of it and then just make it some dark, twisted way? Or
Yeah, for sure. There was a little bit of, there was like 2 things going on at this point. One was I had been working on, at the time that I started coming up with I Hate Fairyland, I had been on Oz for about 4 years. And as I'd work on it, I'd be reading the script. I was like, and then I'd read the novel, because every time I'd read the original novel first before we'd start working on it. And I was like, why isn't Dorothy mad at these people all the time? Like, because she would be like, hey, should I go right or left? And they'd be like, well, maybe you should. You know, it's like, oh my God, how insanely annoyed would you be if no one ever gave you a straight answer? Right? It's just like, it's ridiculous. But she seemed to love it. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. So couple that with me having my first kid, right? I got a couple kids now. But at the time, I had my first child, and he was about 3 maybe. And our house is filled with toys and these toys that, like, anybody who has kids out there knows what I'm talking about. These toys, like, as you like lightly bump them, like repeat these songs, like they're and they're digitized and they're terrible, and you just hear them all day. And then at the same time, my son's watching Dora the Explorer. This is a terrible show. You know, there's literally, like, for those of you who have never had the pleasure to watch Dora, there's literally a song that's called I'm the Map, and here are the lyrics. I'm the map, 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 I'm the map. Do you know how many times she sings that per episode? Fuck ton. A fuck ton. And so in my life, I am literally listening to this stuff over and over, and Yo Gabba, and I love Yo Gabba Gabba, but it's on all the time. And it kind of, so that mixed with the stuff on Oz, I was like, this is weird. Like, I'm an adult, and I live in this world that's built of kid stuff,
Right.
And then my escape is to go to work where I'm an adult and I make this kid stuff. And so I was like, wow, this is a weird life that I live where I feel like a 40-year-old inside, but everything points towards me being a child, or that surrounds me.
Right.
So that's really what Gertrude and I Hate Fairyland was a young girl who on the inside is 40. She's me, okay? I'm working some shit out.
Right.
Just
You're
working
going
some
through
shit.
it. It's a process. It's all a process.
Hug.
So with characters like Gertrude, and then you work on Rocket, and currently you're on Deadpool. They all are very animated, crazy characters. So how do you work on each character, and do they kind of blend? Do you have a thought process of, oh, Deadpool should be like this, but I kind of see Gertrude doing something kind of Deadpool-like? Does it mesh together sometimes in your head?
It definitely does. Like there's subtle nuances, but sometimes, like when I first did my first interview on, somebody's like, oh, like what makes you good for writing Deadpool? I was like, I feel like I've been writing Deadpool for about 7 years. I just called them other books. You know, like one was called I Hate Fairyland and one was called Rocket Raccoon, you know. But there are slight differences, right? So for me, Deadpool to me is like, he's kind of an ornery, edgy guy that kind of wants to think that he's doing something good.
Right.
But doesn't, you know, but he's very morally gray, you know. So all it takes for him is like, well, I'm not going to kill that guy because he hasn't done something bad, but it doesn't take a lot of convincing to make you, for me, to make Deadpool be like, oh, no, he's bad. I'll kill him. That's cool. Where Rocket, the thing that they all have in common is they all speak their mind and they say what they think, which is definitely a trait that I have. But the nuances between them are, you know, Gert from I Hate Fairyland is let go of all. She doesn't care anymore because she lives in a world where nothing really matters.
Exactly.
So she knows that she can go full tilt and it doesn't matter. It's a weird world. Rocket was somebody who I viewed as way more of a mouth, but actually had a lot more going on inside that we ever got to really see. So he was much more of just an obnoxious talker. And then Deadpool is a little bit, to me, a mixture between the two. Like slightly crazy, but wants to be good, but we don't, and maybe I don't even know as writing him, I don't necessarily know where the insides of him are quite yet. So yeah, there's things that they share, but there's subtle nuances
but they're
between
individual still within their own thing. So tell us a little bit about your new books that are coming out, Bully Wars and Middle West. Give us a little bit about both and kind of the inspiration for them.
Bully Wars, again, having children, my oldest son is 9. They're amazing, right? They're just like these little banks of stuff I steal from. So Bully Wars is, you know, I started reading the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books and Captain Underpants books and a lot of the books that my son likes. And we're watching those movies. And what I started to realize, and even in the movies that we grew up with in the 80s, I started to realize that any story that dealt with bullies, that bullies were they were black and white. It was like, this person's a bully, and they're going to grow up to be a villain. And that's it. Like, in a storytelling, that's how we work it. Like, and I just, similar to Fairyland, I was like, let's do a Alice in Wonderland or Dorothy or a Wizard of Oz type of story, but let's spin it on its head and say, what if this?
Right.
And with Bully Wars, it was like, what if we took the typical bullied story and turned it on its head, which is maybe the bully doesn't have to be a bully forever. Like, what would it take for a bully that bullies kids his whole life to start realizing, like, wait a minute, maybe I have more in common with these kids that I pick on than I understand. And they're kids. Like, we tell these stories about young kids, you know, they're 10, 11, 12, 13. Like, we're supposed to be changing them and teaching them, we're not supposed to write them off. Exactly. So even if he's making even if this 14-year-old's making bad choices, I feel like it's okay for us to maybe give him some tools to maybe not be that way, you know? Right. So Bully Wars is a funny way to play around with the idea of a bully named Rufus who has bullied kids forever. He's been the biggest bully in elementary school and middle school, and on the first day of high school, he gets ready to go bully again. He's really excited. He's about ready to run a new school, and before he does, he gets bullied. And he realizes, oh my God, I'm no longer the king of the hill. Right. And he ends up having to kind of strike a deal with the kids who he's been picking on for all these years of school, and to make a deal like, we'll help you win this competition if you agree not to bully us anymore. along that way, the two sides will realize, like, the bullied side will realize that sometimes when you get a little power, it can be very intoxicating.
Right.
And they make some decisions that don't make them feel really good. And the same way with Rufus, the bully, he's going to make some decisions that realize, like, oh, like actually, like, me and this kid like Star Wars together. Like, we like nerdy stuff together. Why am I against him? So that's Bully Wars in a nutshell, but in a really funny way.
Right. It's a funny way to kind of shine light on bullying in schools and how you can change and you don't have to. And if you look at it on the other side, it's not the best feeling to get bullied.
Exactly. So our hope is at the end, you're going to laugh. You're going to look at Aaron Conley's beautiful art. And at the end of the day, hopefully some younger kids will realize, like, we've all been through this, and life is a very gray area, and it's always we're going to be surfing through this gray area for a long time. Then Middle West is a book that's coming out in November 22nd or 21st, and it's written by me. It's drawn by Jorge Corona, and that is a story of a boy named Abel going through a Midwest-like environment, and it's kind of a modern fantasy style story. But at the heart of it, Abel lives with a single dad. The single dad has some issues. There's a little bit of a conflict between him and his son, and it gets physical one day. And it's funny, right? No, it's not. This is my first non-yuck book. And one day, the dad takes their confrontation a little more physical than we should as parents, and transforms into a literal tornado monster. And it's kind of a manifestation of that anger and some of those things that we kind of keep built up inside. And Abel then goes off on a quest to make sure that he doesn't have that same thing in him, which is kind of, my way to play around with the idea of, as a parent myself, you try not to make the same mistakes that your parents made before you. It's about trying to break the cycle of abuse through family generations. It's about toxic masculinity and making sure that young boys and men are okay to talk about their feelings and be flawed and not have to be so aggressive and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff underlying that while we're still dealing with it's kind of a throwback to those old Don Bluth movies that were very cool, like American Tail. That's a beautiful movie, but that was a heavy story about immigration and loss and things like that, or A Secret of Nim. It's about a dying child. And these are beautiful animated movies that seem like kid movies on the surface, but we used to deal with like really heavy subjects back then. And so it's a throwback to that era of storytelling or the Miyazaki levels of storytelling. So Middle West is, I don't know that I've ever been more proud of a project than I've been of that. I really can't wait for everybody to check that out.
It doesn't seem as comedic.
No,
as
I mean,
the other ones.
I'm
that
always
a change? Like, does that feel weird almost?
It's refreshing because sometimes, there's a lot of personal stuff that I'm putting into Middle West. But the refreshing part is, sometimes I go down to write, a Deadpool or a Fairyland, and I just like me and my kid had a moment, or, I had a fight with my wife or whatever, and you're not feeling funny. And now I've got to go write jokes, I literally just wrote an issue of Deadpool where he's like, the whole point of the issue is like, I have no jokes. I do not feel funny. And it's because when I started writing, I was like, I do not feel funny. Today or this week, I am at the end of it. So, this book kind of came from, it was a nice, refreshing change to be able to sit down and, dig into some personal stuff and write a more long-form narrative and dive into some issues that I think young families kind of struggle with a little bit.
So it seems like with all that you've written and drawn, a lot of it comes from you and your own personal life and what you've dealt with. For people out there who want to be writers, who want to be artists, and who want to jump into the world of comics, what advice would you give them?
Really what it comes down to is make comics, right? Like, everybody will ask me, like, how can I break into the industry? I want to make comics. The greatest thing about the era that we live in right now with the internet and how much access that young kids have to everything, every kid has an iPad, every kid has the internet.
Right.
Just start making comics. When I was coming up, the internet was barely a thing. We definitely didn't have a way to make something and share it with people that minute. We had to figure out how to get it printed, how we were going to get that printed product to somebody else on an independent level. That's not the case anymore. Now, if you have an inspiration, you have a story to tell, you can sit down with pen and paper, scan it in, publish it online, share it with the world, put it on Instagram, put it on things. So my thing is, don't wait for gatekeepers to tell you you've entered a business or now we're going to let you into the industry. Make comics, tell stories, write novels, make stuff. Literally, my motto is wake up, make stuff. That's it. Like if you want to make it in the world, wake up and make stuff. That's it. Like I don't care what that stuff is. Just if you want it, make it happen. Don't let a wall be between you and the people you want to share your stuff with.
Awesome. Wake up, make stuff.
Wake up, make stuff.
That is awesome to end on. I have to say, well, thank you so much.
Thank you
for talking about your work and pick up Bully Wars and Middle West and all of it. He's done so much, and it's all fantastic. I am a personal fan. So thank you, and thank you to everyone coming out to watch the panel.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you.
Thank you.